Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class today. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line, 712-770-9418, provided by Global Store. Thank you very much, Global Store. I'm Vincent Finelli. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. Welcome, Rick.
Good morning, Vincent. I have a question before we get anything else. You mentioned something last week that resonated with me, and I don't know why, but you said something about gasoline, gas tanks, and fuel pumps, and I had to replace my fuel pump a third time, and it's something about the tank not going down all the way to empty, and why?
Okay, your question is why is that?
Yeah. Why do you not allow your tank to go empty? Okay. I'm sure it's a simple thing. I just don't.
It is. It's very simple. Let me start with a little bit of history. So back when automobiles were first arrived on the scene, I'm talking around 1900s, there was a gravity feed fuel system. So you put the fuel in the tank above the engine, and gravity would pull the fuel down into a carburetor, which would mix fuel and air, and that would go into the combustion chamber, meaning the cylinder, and it would explode. And that's how it worked. Well, having the fuel tank above the engine is crazy because of the heat of the exhaust. I mean, you could have fires very easily. So what happened next was the fuel was put away from the engine, meaning in a gas tank.
The other side of the car.
Other side of the car, or in the back, in the rear, under the frame. In order to do that, gravity would not pull the fuel up to a higher level where the engine was. So they had a fuel pump. That fuel pump was typically a diaphragm with a couple of valves, and the diaphragm was moved back and forth by a cam. It's a lobe on the cam shaft. So it would pump with, we'll call it like a plunger type of a system. And that worked really well. And they were easily replaced with 2 bolts and 2 metal fuel lines. So one wrench, you'd be able to take off the fuel pump and replace it. You could even repair it with a replacement diaphragm. Okay, well then, with fuel and that's carbureted systems. With fuel injection systems, they needed a higher fuel pressure. So they built, the engineers built an electric fuel pump. Now, the electric fuel pump is literally a motor and a pump together. And they put it in some of the designs where the fuel pump was mounted on, let's say, the frame rail under the driver's seat, that area. And it was powered with 2 wires, plus and minus, on 12-volt battery. But then the engineers decided that, boy, that's extra complicated with fittings in and out. So they put the fuel pump in the tank. So what this thing now is, in many cars, is a fuel pump inside the fuel tank, immersed in gasoline. And the idea behind this is the gasoline would be the coolant for the electric motor that powers the fuel pump itself. And if you have a full tank of fuel, that entire fuel pump is immersed in gasoline and runs cool. If you have a half a tank, it's still immersed because the fuel pumps are about 12 inches tall. If you have a quarter of a tank or less, the electric motor itself is not immersed in fuel. So if you're just traveling down the highway, fuel is not cooling off the fuel pump. Additionally, what happens is more fuel is pumped to the engine than the engine needs. So the engine area is hot. The fuel injection system is warm. It's usually on top of the engine. And so excess fuel is returned back to the fuel tank. So now what we have is we have the fuel in the fuel tank being pumped to the engine, getting heated by the engine. The excess is returned to heat up the fuel that's in the fuel tank, and that little bit of fuel is what's heating up the electric motor on the fuel pump itself more than it can take. So if you have less fuel in the fuel tank, you have less cooling capacity, and the fuel pump itself tends to overheat quickly and self-destruct. That is why.
Wow. So I have two tanks. I have one of those where the one tank goes empty. I switch over to the other tank. And I've been doing that where one tank runs empty and then I switch over to the other one. But since I've had my dad's truck, which is a 97, 98 Ford pickup to 150, I've had to replace the fuel pump 3 times.
Mm-hmm. And, well, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the fuel pumps probably come from China today. And a lot of the automotive parts that come from China are substandard. I can say that for certain because we have an automotive shop here and we see a lot of lousy, low quality, look nice, but low quality Chinese parts, and they fail way too fast. It used to be when you and I were, playing with automobiles back in the 70s, it used to be that original equipment manufactured parts were not as good as aftermarket parts. So, for example, if you bought an ignition system from Mallory, that was way better than the ignition system from AC Delco or Ford or Chrysler. Well, if you bought ignition points that were made by Mallory, they had way bigger contacts, could handle more current than the little tiny contacts that were used on AC Delco distributors. So, but it's reversed now. Now the aftermarket parts are substandard compared to, in most cases, compared to the OEM parts. So that's another problem. So you're probably replacing the fuel pump with an aftermarket fuel pump, which is not as durable as the original one. And I'll bet you the original one lasted, way, way longer, maybe 5 to 10 times longer. Isn't that right?
I don't know. I have a 280Z, a 1976 280Z, and that engine right now has 320,000 miles on the engine itself. Everything else in the car has essentially been at some point in history replaced, except the engine. And the engine right now is running within a quarter of a pound across the ports. I have never seen an engine as well built as this Datsun. It's not Nissan, it was Datsun. And I can still lift the tires off the front down in 2 gears when I'm sitting in it alone. It's the best car I've ever driven. And what happened to our vehicles and that kind of quality of steel? And I had a friend that was sideswiped. A car ran a stop sign and hit a 280Z sideways and ruined the car. Well, the car has a twin outrigger frame to it, and the people that ran the stop sign hit the passenger side at 37 miles an hour, and the person sitting in that seat only received a bruise.
Is this a TVR? Is that the kind of car this person was driving?
I'm sorry, it's
from the 70s.
It was 76. Mine was fuel injected.
No, I'm talking about. The
twin outrigger frame means that car is so well designed. It got hit by a Mack truck and nobody was hurt. Yeah, well, we used to be very concerned about making cars that would protect the passengers, the occupants. Volvo, that was something that Volvo was really world famous for. That's all gone now, too, with airbags and the rest of it. But but my friend, who's an ex-wife, she was sitting in someone else's 280Z as a passenger, and that car got slammed at almost 40 miles an hour, hit the side of the car straight in, and she got out of the car and walked away from it.
There are vehicles that are way stronger. As a matter of fact, let's just take a couple minutes and talk about this. So a new Dodge truck showed up at the farm. Oh, let's say 5 years old. It's pretty new to me. And the owners were really delighted with this new purchase. And I lifted the hood and I put my thumb against part of the sheet metal, and I could move it in and out with my thumb as if there was very little resistance. What has happened is automobile manufacturers, pressured by the government to deliver more miles per gallon, are doing it the best way they know how, and that is to make the vehicles lighter. But at the same time, the buyers of these new vehicles want bigger. So if you look at new trucks today, they are really imposing. They are intimidating when they're behind you, and their bumper is about even with a passenger car's rear window. I mean, it's really kind of intimidating. So what they've done is they've lightened these vehicles, and at the same time, they have to make them thinner, and they're taking metal out, but they're using more. It appears that they're using a lot more metal, but the metal's thinner. So just go to if you're at Walmart and you feel comfortable just pressing the side of a vehicle, like the center of the door, with your thumb, just lightly, you won't believe how much it gives. And the proof of that is if you see these cars that are banged up, you say, how is it possible that sheet metal could be so wrinkled? What kind of an accident would be so small to do so much sheet metal damage? You'll see that. So it's kind of...
I know, like the
different.
Hondas. I recently got hit by another car where they hit my rear bumper while I was turning left, and it tore out the entire front end of his car, and you couldn't even see the scratch on my truck.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe it. I mean, his car was completely undrivable, and my truck didn't even notice it. Now, I use it as a farm truck, so it has a lot of owies all over it because I use it for years, hauling hay, logs, rock, whatever. It's a farm truck. And so I don't care if it gets dinged up a little bit. This guy hit my rear bumper. He didn't hit the side of my truck. He hit the rear bumper when I was turning left. And his whole driver's side was gone. Entire car, Honda. It's a newer Honda. Mine's a 97, 98 Ford 150. A little scratch on the bumper. It didn't even bend the bumper. It didn't even distort it or anything. It just a little scratch on it, and there he is over on the side of the road, completely undrivable.
We have a neighbor. We have a neighbor who drives a Chevy Cruze. It's one of those old, small, lightweight cars, and it just tapped another vehicle. And if you look under the bumper of a Chevy Cruze, it's air. There's not much there, and I'm serious about this. And this Chevy Cruze, it needed a new bumper from just a little tap. The headlight system was damaged, and it pushed the seam where the door opens. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us, class. RichardAllenMiller.com. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller. Rick, we're talking about fuel pumps, and there's another little piece of the puzzle I'd like to share with our class and you. The electric fuel pumps are on assembly, and they have three major components. One is the fuel pump motor. Then there's the fuel pump itself that moves the gasoline. And then the third is the fuel filter. And what a lot of manufacturers have decided to do is take the three separate parts, which would be the fuel pump and the fuel filter, and combine that. What they do is they put the equivalent of a sock. And this is a fabric sock, kind of like that material that's on the inside of Chinese footwear, Chinese boots. It's kind of a pattern that has embossing and debossing. And that is the filter material. And that is a flat, folded, seamed plastic welded sock that sets on the bottom of the fuel tank. And the fuel is drawn up through that sock to the fuel pump and then pushed to the engine. Well, as vehicles get older, debris clogs up that fuel filter at the very bottom of the fuel tank. So if you have a full fuel tank, the percentage of debris in the tank per unit of fuel is smaller. But if you have less fuel in the tank, the percentage of debris is greater. And that tends to restrict the flow even more. So what happens is, as the flow of fuel is restricted more, the electric motor works harder, draws more current, gets hotter, and at the same time there's less fuel to cool the motor, which causes the premature failures. The other thing is that it's very difficult in many cases to replace an electric fuel pump. For example, if you have a Mustang, a relatively late model Mustang, you take out the back seat and then there's an access port where you remove the access port and then you can unscrew this large cap that might be 5 inches in diameter and with an O-ring, and then you can lift out the fuel pump. If you have a pickup truck like a Chevy or a Ford, what happens is you have two choices. You either take the gas tank down or you take the bed box off. Now think about that. Think about, can you take the bed box off your pickup truck by yourself? I don't think so. Can you get two people to do it? I don't think so. I think it's going to take about 4 people to lift the bed box off, unless you have an overhead lift, and then you can put some straps around the bed box and lift it up. That's why it costs about $1,000 to replace the fuel pump on a pickup truck. And usually what happens when someone has a problem with their fuel pump, they think, you know what, maybe I don't have enough gas in the tank. So they fill it up. Then what happens is you have a full tank of fuel, let's say 26 to 34 gallons of fuel at roughly 8 pounds per gallon. Now you have to deal with that, and you have to empty the tank. A lot of people do something that I think is just plain nuts. They try to locate that access cap at the top of the fuel tank. And they'll take a Sawzall and they'll start cutting holes, large holes, in the bed of the pickup truck so that they don't have to take the fuel tank out. That's how ridiculous these designs are. And it's one more point. So if you think that the fuel tank is able to be removed without jacking the car up or the truck up, well, that's generally not possible, because even if you could get the fuel tank lowered onto the ground with the vehicle on the ground, there's not enough clearance to get the fuel pump out of the fuel tank. So it's a mess. It's an expensive mess. What does it cost you each time you go to have that fuel pump worked on? Rick, do you have an idea?
No, I think my fuel pump was nothing. I mean, I didn't pay hardly 100 I don't know, it's 125.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, cheap.
It's the labor.
Yeah, right.
It's the labor that's
expensive. The part
expensive.
itself wasn't very, and he spent a couple of hours. Danny's been a really good mechanic of mine. I've been fortunate, you know. I started with City Automotive back in the 80s, and when Gene and when they retired, they sold to this new guy, and this new guy's now run it for 30 years. And he and his wife come over for dinner. I mean, I have a really nice relationship with my mechanic. I mean, we're friends aside from my vehicles, you know.
Isn't that great? That's wonderful. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. We'll be right back. One last thing about these electric fuel pumps, Glass. The auto manufacturers have decided that you don't need a fuel filter. You don't have a replaceable fuel filter. When it's time to replace your fuel filter, they think you should replace your fuel pump as well. So instead of a $10 part, actually it used to be 99 cents or $2 when I was selling auto parts behind the counter, you know, after school in high school. Those parts are now, they can cost you $1,000 or so to replace the fuel pump and the fuel filter because it's one assembly. And it's so complicated to do it. So the idea is, if you think that new cars have fuel filters, the answer is most of them do not. not a separate fuel filter, the way it used to be. You used to get a tune-up, you get spark plugs, air cleaner, points condenser, rotor, and a fuel filter. That was a tune-up. Well, now you don't get that fuel filter replaced until you need to have the entire fuel pump replaced. So that's a real problem. At least I think it is, because it's such a big job to take out an electric fuel pump out of a fuel tank that a mechanic will say, you know what, you need a new fuel filter because yours is plugged up, so we're going to replace the whole fuel pump and fuel filter. So that I wanted to share that with our class. Rick, coronavirus, we've been reporting numbers that were higher than the numbers that were officially reported. Then a few days later, the official numbers would catch up to our numbers. And we reported several days ago that we think that the official numbers are off by 50, a factor of 50. So the real numbers are 50 times greater than the numbers that are being reported from China. Well, the latest numbers, according to what I have learned, is that it's not 2,000 or 2,000 something deaths. It's 200,000 deaths in China. And that explains why they brought in 40 new movable crematoria, 40 of them, and high speed to burn up the flesh faster with catalytic converters, so that you don't have ash as shown in the Third Reich videos in Nazi Germany and Poland in the extermination camps. So it's a real problem. And if the numbers are off by that much, reported 2,000, actual 200,000, this is way more dangerous than the media is letting us believe. Your thoughts, Rick?
So the concern I have, I'm not as worried about the virus itself, but the implications and impact on our food and day-to-day products that we take for granted that we can go down to the store and buy. If we have a grid-down situation like that oil refinery that blew up on the West Coast a couple of days ago, that was Matt Stein's when technology fails. And what's failing now is the CDC's response coefficient and or the state-by-state ability to handle a pandemic of some minor level. Nobody's equipped. There's only maybe 3 states in the entire union that could handle any of this. And you will notice that essentially China is going to go bankrupt. And that means that our national debt is going to be wiped in terms of what we owe China and why we were going to give them parts of California. It goes downhill from there. Then you've got Iran and Japan and some of the other countries that are now having to lock down, and is, to some extent, a relationship of, isn't it interesting which countries are being taken out? It's almost as if this was used as a new kind of weapon to take out countries that we were at war with financially. Now, that's another facet of the facilities I'm looking at in China do not look like hospitals. They look like internment camps for reindoctrination. And everybody's got a cold. And a lot of people die from the cold. But a cold has to do with stress. A brand new book I'm going to be putting up on my website tomorrow. I have a brand new book out called Stress Management, A Holistic Approach. If you balance the stressors in your life, and let me tell you, everybody's got them, then you don't get sick, because your body is possibly one of the finest medical laboratories there is. And what you're trying to do is not allow something to take hold of your body where it can't cope. Because the coronavirus is absolutely been around as a cold for a long time, and it's when you get pneumonia and or other kinds of side effects from it establishing beyond what it should. Now, this particular virus works in the mouth and thyroid area. And just an FYI, when my body starts to feel like I'm getting congestion where my body is not coping and taking out the congestion, and I'm starting to go downhill in congestion, I eat a raw or dried stick of echinacea root. It has echinacea in it, and what they do, it numbs the mouth after a period of time of chewing on this root like you would a toothbrush. You stick it in your mouth and you just suck on it and chew on it. And what you need is approximately a quarter of an inch daily for 2 days, and that's it. And what that does is it causes the turgor in your synovial fluids to bead, and those electrostatic fields reduce where the habitat can set up on the virus. Now, what you've done is you've isolated the virus inside your mouth, and your body goes in and drills it. It's as simple as that. And the whole thing is about fear. And as long as you're eating correctly, exercising correctly, and paying attention to diabetes, and you know whom I'm talking about, Dr. Grace and others, you need to focus on that. When you do, you don't get sick. And that's how you beat this thing. And really, my guess is this was more of a weapon, not for population control, which it is doing with China. But notice, it's taking out our national debt. We don't owe money anymore. But everything's going up in price, too, isn't it? And that's another reason for living off the grid. And when we come back, I have a question for Vincent on how to take activated charcoal and replace it in a Brita, because at some point you can't get your replacement filters. How are you going to clean your water? Simple.
Okay. Let's take a minute and talk about the supply chain. So Procter & Gamble has announced that because of the supplies that come from China to make the products that Procter & Gamble sells as a household.
Half your pharmaceuticals come from China.
Yeah. Well, they've announced that...
Whatever, all of that comes from China. Where are you going to get it?
Yeah, I believe the number is around 17,000 different products that Procter & Gamble makes. Yeah, and the ingredients are some of the ingredients or all the ingredients to make these some 17,000 products come from China. And let me just
by the way, Walmart is failing right now. Just FYI.
Well,
so is Harbor Freight.
And here's why. Okay, I'm just going to mention some of the brand names. Okay, it's a long list. So let me just get through a few of them. There are feminine hygiene products, always. Ariel laundry detergent, Bounty paper towels, Charmin, Crest toothpaste, Dawn dishwashing liquid, Downy fabric softener, Fairy washing liquid, Febreze, Gain detergents, Gillette razors, Head and Shoulders shampoo, Olay products, Oral-B, oral hygiene products, Pampers, Gloves, Can-Do, Pantene hair products, SKII or SK2 beauty products, Tide, Vicks, Joy dishwashing liquid, Gain dishwashing liquid, Ivory dishwashing liquid, Braun hair care products, Aussie hair care, let's see, Hoffman LaRoche, the Pantene products, Vidal Sassoon, Pepto-Bismol, Scope, mouthwash, Vicks, cold products, Bounce, fabric softener, Cascade, let's see, Safeguard, soap, Swiffer cleaning products.
Anything you get from Dollar General, the dollar store.
Yeah.
Walmart,
Ivory.
Safeway, Thriftway,
Yeah.
Albertson, anything like that. I would say 45 to 60% has a Chinese stamp on it.
Absolutely. So the point of reading all of that, class, is that's one company. That's one large international company, global company. And the products that they make are in your house right now. So if you think that you can just go and get it anytime you want in the future, I don't think that will be the case. So I suggest that tonight, with your family, sit around the kitchen table. This is nothing new. I've been suggesting this for as long as I've been on the air. Actually, before I've been on the air. I suggest you sit around the kitchen table with your family. Say, here's the rule tonight. Rules. No cell phones. Everybody's going to have a dinner together, and we're going to have a piece of paper, and we're going to talk about the things that we'd like to not be without. What is it that we would really feel terrible if we didn't have in the future? And write them down, prioritize that list as a family. Now, somebody has to be in charge, okay? And whoever in charge overrules any problems that occur. And you prioritize that list, and you go get it when? Right now. As soon as you can, you go out and you get it. And what I've seen is that no one's doing it yet. I'm stunned that after the president's address, and we should talk about that when we come back, last night, I am stunned at what I saw and what I did not see. And we'll address Rick's question when we come back. Dr. Richard Alan Miller's with us, richardalanmiller.com. Dr. Richard Alan Miller's with us, and the question was about making charcoal. So in order to make charcoal, you need a few things. You need a metal container with a lid, and you want one that doesn't have plastic handles that will burn. So all metal would be good. Stainless steel might be just fine. Cast iron would be fine. And what you do is you build a fire, and I think you should consider doing that outside because you're going to make some smoke as you make charcoal. So you make a small fire, and once that fire gets going pretty well, and you can do that on the ground outside. You find an area that you won't be setting on fire, like dry grass. So you find an area that's safe to do this, and you can take some stones and dig a little depression and put some stones around it. So campfire rules if you were camping. And then what you do is you take a metal pot, and it could be cast iron, and you place small pieces of hardwood in this pot. And or if you don't have hardwood, you could use coconut shells. But in the United States, most places that's kind of unlikely. But that's what the water filter charcoal is made from in many cases for commercially produced water filters. That would be coconut shells. And so you put the coconut shells or the hardwood small pieces in a pot, and you allow it to get hot on the fire. And what happens is it takes a while, but the heat will drive off the moisture and the gases from the wood or the coconut. You put a lid on it, but you allow the steam and smoke to escape. It might take as many as 2, 3, 4, 5 hours for this process. And that is how you make charcoal. Then when you're done, you allow it to cool, and you have what looks like not those briquettes. It doesn't look like that. It looks like chunks of unburned wood, the kind that you used to get when you bought charcoal for the barbecue. That's what it will look like. You rinse that with water after it cools, and now you have charcoal. You can grind it up with a mortar and pestle. You can smash it with a hammer if you'd like, kind of like you're tenderizing it, and that's how you make it. But the whole process could take 24 hours elapsed time. So, and you allow it to cool dry. Activating it is another story. And if you want to activate it, I suggest you look that up on the internet and find out how to do that, because it's slightly more dangerous. And I'd rather you look it up yourself and learn how to do it. There's plenty of information on how to do, make your own charcoal and activated charcoal. And so what do you do with it? Well, I can tell you this, that I got bitten by a recluse spider, and I didn't know it at the time. And we took a picture of it, copied the picture to the internet, emailed it to my medical doctor, an internist, and her nurse looked at it and said, no, it's no big deal. It's nothing to worry about. Well, it had the purple. It was about the size of a dime, I would say. It was purple with a bullseye. And what I did was I took an activated charcoal water filter, and I took a clean knife and I scraped charcoal from the side of that water filter, and I made a paste with filtered water, and I put it right on top of that purple spot and put a Band-Aid over it. The next day, that purple spot was gone except for a ring around it where the poultice I made wasn't large enough to cover the entire spot. So I made some more the size of a quarter and put it over it with a Band-Aid, and the next day it was all gone. So what happened was the charcoal removed the toxins, this is my belief, from that bite, and I was fine. Rick, do you have any comments about that?
Sure. Julie is in California and went for a walk the other day and somehow got exposed to poison oak down in California. Got it all over her body. Mm-hmm. And it was bad. And what she did, my suggestion, was apple cider vinegar and baking soda as a paste, which is not as good as activated charcoal, but does the same thing, because half of what you're doing is changing the pH in the area. And you put that paste on, and it takes away poison oak. That's how you do it. If you wanted to make a soap, you make your soap would have apple cider vinegar in it and baking soda as part of it, and you can call that Marie's Poison Oak Soap.
Mm-hmm. And so
simple,
what we're talking
making
about,
baking soda, by the way, is also very simple. It's a little more complicated, but not much, than activated charcoal. And activated charcoal from a campfire is you have the logs that are down, and you have they're like burned through, and it's like charcoal, but they're still in chunks. That's what you use out of a campfire. If you don't have your pan and other kinds of laboratory equipment to make it more, pure. Mm-hmm. And what I would do, I just had a friend ask me, you use a Brita. Berkeys are not as good, believe it or not. Brita is cheaper, and you change your filter every 4 months. If grid down, you can't buy filters anymore. You cut out the top of the filter, you pour the...
Hold that thought. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of U.S. State Affairs. By the way, tomorrow, class, Phil Hudock's going to be with us. And that'll be 1 hour. And another hour, I will be talking about what I think you should consider buying and having ready right now to self-quarantine. That's where we are headed. We are just about completely self-quarantined. Hardly anybody comes here anymore. Telephone is the access to get to us. And that's by choice, because we believe that 200,000 people have died in China. We believe that 8,000 are self-quarantined in California right now. These are pretty big numbers. We know that New York has about 82 people who are infected in New York. And if you think about New York, class, the population is a little over 8 million. It's about 8.3 million people who live there. About 5 million people use public transportation, as you heard with David in Illinois yesterday. 5 million people use public transportation. So what is the likelihood that this is going to spread like wildfire in New York City? It's absolutely inevitable. Rick, you were talking about Brita filters, and yes, you can refill a Brita water refill. Yes. So they cost about $4 a piece. And
you can cut the top off, dump that shit out that's in it, and put activated charcoal, and it works just as well.
You can, and that's exactly right.
Have a water filter system in your kitchen without any mess at all. You make your activated charcoal out in the campfire, and you bring it inside. You change your filter every 4 months.
Yes, and also, so if the filters are, well, actually, depending on where you buy them, they can cost as much as $6 to $10 a piece. Typically, if you buy a bunch of them on Jeff Bezos Incorporated Amazon, you can get them for more like $4. But yes, you can take a drill and a drill bit, and it's going to have to be about, I'm thinking about a quarter of an inch to a half an inch in diameter. Drill a hole in the water filter and pour out the activated charcoal that has been used, and flush it with water, clear water, and replace the activated charcoal. Put in a plastic plug, and you're good to go. And you can keep doing that over and over. And if you buy the activated charcoal, it's going to cost in small quantities, let's say 50 cents per refill. So that's a great way to go.
You can bypass, even if there is no grid down, you can bypass the expense of having to replace your Brita filters. It's important to realize to activate it, you need to soak it in water for usually 12 hours. And then you take the filter and then put it back in the Brita.
Mm-hmm. And there's activated carbon has been known to treat water for almost 2,000 years, maybe even over 2,000 years. And lately, within the last about 100 years, we've learned to use it for medicinal purposes. And one of the reasons is because activated charcoal has an enormous surface area. If you take 1 pound of granular activated carbon, the surface area, if you were to measure the entire surface area of all those granules, it would be about 125 acres. That's huge. So it has the capability of attracting and trapping toxins. So when people are poisoned, one of the treatments for a poisoning would be activated charcoal or
now
carbon.
Let's take this to the next level. If you also activate your water, which is making it structured water, it comes out of the faucet or out of the stream, it's basically scrambled. And what you need to do is unscramble it by pouring it into the container you're going to use, like making coffee, and you go in clockwise, because it has been counterclockwise at this hemisphere and destructured. And by pouring it into your cup clockwise, where water rolls into the cup clockwise, will restructure up to 60%. And when that water makes it structured water, or H3O2, and by putting a single drop of baking soda in it, restructures the entire thing up to 75%. Then, when you mix it with activated charcoal, what you now have is a fullerene that is the finest antioxidant the world has ever known, and will go in and take care of nuclear radiation inside your body. Boo.
So, Rick, here's what I was thinking. As you were saying that, I was thinking about something we do here once a month or every 6 weeks or so. We will top off the cells in our solar system. We have nickel iron cells. There's 40 of them. And what I did was I bought some hose, ice maker hose. And you can get that at one of those big box home improvement stores. and it typically might be 1/8 or 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And when you buy it, it's all coiled up. So you can buy X number of feet of it. Typically, they'll cut off, some length that you want. But it's already coiled. And the coil is probably about an 8-inch in diameter coil. What I was thinking, and what I do, is I fabricated an adapter so that I have one of those in your refrigerator type water jugs, maybe 2.5 gallons, and has a little spigot on the end, and it's clear. So the idea is you can put water in your refrigerator in a container, and they sell these at the Chinese factory outlet. And you can open your refrigerator door, push the little spout, and get a glass of cool water. That's what this is for. Well, I adapted that, put it on a ladder, and I use gravity to fill these 40 cells. And it takes me and my son about, half an hour to 45 minutes to do all this. Well, when I'm done, I recoil this little piece of hose. And it's like the same materials milk jugs are made out of, the same kind of plastic. Well, what if we took that, Rick, and fabricated an adapter for our ProPure or Berkey water filter stainless steel system, and we just had the water go round and round and round in a small coil, let's say 2 inches, 3 inches in diameter or 2 inches in diameter, and we had it maybe 10 loops around and around and around coming out of there, and then finally into a glass for consumption. Would that do the job, or is that too big of a...
No. That is how you restructure the water. And the problem is most of the water we drink is unstructured, which means most of it goes straight to the bladder. What you want is when you take water into your body, you'd like at least 60% of it going into the cells. The only way you can do that is by activating the water and making it structured again, restructuring the water. That's why people put spoons inside the drink and they stir it clockwise. Just that simple action alone changes 40 to 60% of the water you're drinking. And now you don't go to the bathroom as frequently and you're more hydrated. And when you're thirsty, you are already at 5% dehydration. And at 10% is when you die.
Rick, there used to be an old test for dehydration, and a nurse would go to the patient and right at just where the hand joints, right at the wrist, nurse would pinch the skin, not to hurt it, but just to pull it upward. And if it took a little longer to return to its normal shape or position, that would indicate dehydration. Is that an accurate test, or is that nonsense?
It depends on what part of the skin you do. A Navy SEAL trick is to take the inner arm near the wrist, not at the wrist, but about 6 inches beyond the wrist. And if you take your fingernail and do a scratch across it where you're just breaking the first layer of skin, it just leaves a little mark on it, doesn't break the skin or anything. You can take anything in the field from a mushroom to a plant, and you hold it there for 30 seconds. And that will tell you whether it's toxic, poisonous, or not because of histamine release. It's a simple, you're in the woods and you don't know whether something's edible and you're hungry. You do a little scratch across your arm and you hold what you want to eat next to it for 30 seconds. If it festers, it's probably toxic.
Okay, so that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. May we talk about growing...
Survival is simple. The rules are really, really simple, and your body is the finest laboratory you can find anywhere, including a university. It will tell you more about what's going on if you know how to read your own body.
So we should be growing mushrooms. Is that correct for treating?
Listen,
everything.
There are three classes. Yes, you should. I have just formed a new corporation up in Alberta in joint partnership with a university in Israel. And we are growing chaga mushroom right now rather than just simply wild grafting it. And growing psychedelic, gourmet, and pharmaceutical mushrooms. Those are the three classifications of mushrooms right now. Psychedelic, gourmet, and pharmaceutical. In the pharmaceutical, there are 72 mushrooms out there. Most of them grow on conifer, and you wouldn't think of them as mushrooms. They're more like a conch. But the reishi and the maitake grow on oak and other kinds of conifer, rotting wood. And I tell you, it's the activated charcoal part of the wood that is what forms the habitat. And you can easily grow these mushrooms using a refrigerator and an attic, or a walk-in cooler if you want to get into high volume, because they are activated by light and cold and moisture. And those three variables determine when it grows, when it fruits, which is what you call the mushroom, that's the fruiting cap, and when it goes stasis and is in limbo. And mycelium is essential in any garden, and you can intercrop these mushrooms with hemp and or other secondary story products that you're growing, like corn or whatever. You want to build your soil up, it's with mushrooms. And these are simply grown in the forest or inside your home. I was growing psychedelic mushrooms in 1971 when I wrote Magical Mushroom Handbook.
All right, we're going to be right back.
Right now on my property in the fall, where I live in Oregon.
Hold that thought, Rick. Hold that thought. We're going to a break. Talking with Dr. Richard Allen Miller, and if you'd like to go to his website, richardallenmiller.com, Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com, and that's where you can buy his books and peruse his offerings. Rick, before we get into growing mushrooms and continue that, I had a comment I'd like to make. Class, I was talking with some of our instructors on the telephone yesterday, and what is happening is we are all coming to the same conclusions. I'm talking about, you get to hear an instructor and maybe two instructors, maybe three at a time, sometimes on the air, but you don't hear more than that usually at one time. And I have been talking with a number of instructors, and we are all on the same page. We all have the same concerns. And it's not as if someone sends out a memo and says, here's what we think. It's not like that. We independently come up with our own thoughts, conclusions, and reactions. But what I'm telling you is the instructors whom I've spoken with off the air, both on conference calls and just two of us, we're all thinking the same thing. I'm talking about Rick. I'm talking about others. And that must mean that there's some real credibility and truth with what we are coming up with. And the point I'm trying to make is, as we go forward with this coronavirus, as it takes down more and more of the supply system, the supply chain, the delivery system, and those who would be going to work who have knowledge about what they're doing, specialists, as they succumb to illnesses and aren't at work anymore, it's going to get worse. And the whole point of this is I believe, and many of our instructors believe, you are going to be more and more and more on your own. And the point of USA Prepares has been to help you learn how to think, ferret out the truth, and find the deception and don't fall for it. And learn skills on your own. There will be a point in time where we may not be available on the radio for you to be in class. That may happen. We have to move, and we are progressing toward that end, and we're very close. We're very close. I'm building equipment so that I will be able to broadcast remotely, not from here, remotely. And it's getting dangerous.
Be like John Connor? There you are, Radio Free America.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you an interesting story before we get back into mushrooms. So the freeze-dry guy told me years ago, he advertised on James Wesley Rawls. He's a USA Prepares instructor, actually freeze-dry guy and James Wesley Rawls, both USA Prepares instructors. So the survival website that James Wesley Rawls has paid advertisements, and the freeze-dry guy sent checks once a month to pay for his advertising for freeze-dried food on James Wesley Rawls' website. And so one day, freeze-dry guy was in contact with James Wesley Rawls, and he said, "Hey, I'm in the area, and I'd like to come take you to lunch." And James Wesley Rawls said, "Where are you?" "Well, you know, where I send the check every month." And James Wesley Rawls said, "I'm not there." So that's what we're going to be like. Okay, we are going to be remote from wherever we are believed to be. So that's getting very, very close to happening. And I'm finishing up the equipment to make that happen. And soon I'm going to be testing that equipment. I'm going to be inserting it into the system. And you won't even know that I am using remote broadcasting equipment to broadcast. It'll be transparent. So I just want to let everybody know there will be a time that, you know, we're going to continue as long as we can, but there may be a time that we just disappear. And it's probably going to be, if it happens, it will be because we can't. Not because we've given up. It's because we can't. So I just want to share that with you. Rick, going forward with growing mushrooms, it's something that I believe, you and I believe, that we have to do. No choice. We have to grow our own.
Mushrooms are essential as part of our food chain in terms of where and how they grow. Chaga, which is the primary one that Russia is now using, is like a conifer. It's a big black lump that grows on birch trees. And you can chop down a birch. We'll pick this up.
Yeah, we're going to teach you how to grow mushrooms when we come back. RichardAllenMiller.com, RichardAllenMiller.com, if you'd like to learn more about Rick and Dr. Richard Allen Miller and peruse his offerings on his website, RichardAllenMiller.com. Yes.
Question. How much time do we have between now and the next commercial?
About 12 minutes.
Can I change subjects just briefly?
Sure.
Okay. So I have asked Vincent to become Dumbledore. And I don't know if he's going to accept that or not. And I'd like all of you listening to me to weigh in on what you would think would be a good automotive mechanic teaching children how to fix their parents' vehicles and managing a bunch of people like me, teaching weird courses on survival to children. I have been given an asset by the CIA and the Brazilian Secret Service. Now, this is an asset that was never used. It was set up as a dummy company, 501c3, that was never used. And when my very dear friend retired from the Brazilian Secret Service, he gave it to me as an asset. It's worth about 20 grand as a online 501c3 tax dodging thing that the CIA was going to use. They never did, called Albert Schweitzer University. And I have found some interest and funding for putting that on and redoing, 30 years later, my courses that I used to teach at Harvard on metaphysics. And what I want to do is I want to convert those into manga comics for children in 2 age groups, from 4 to 10 and from 12 onward. It's the same lesson on metaphysics that I would teach to an adult. I'm writing manga comics. And I want somebody like Vincent to run me and 7 or 8 other instructors. And I'm interested to know what your interests are in helping make that event happen before April. It won't happen before April, but I'd like to try to do it as soon as possible. It'll probably happen in June is when I'll start teaching again. And I'd like to do it online, and I'd like to have as many of you that are interested in supporting us to start registering for that online course. It'll be inexpensive, something like $5 for 2 hours on a computer, like on a Wednesday night or something like that, where there's going to be a video part of it, and out of it will also come a comic. And the way we run it is that your registration as a student will be used to make the thing happen. And so as many people as you want. In other words, you're not going to get it. It's not going to be expensive. You're going to have access. I have already, as an asset, amassed more than 14,000 PDFs of old Bibles and rare manuscripts from which I'm going to teach. And that means that when I teach the lesson, I'm going to give you my references, and you have those documents as old manuscripts to go in and confirm or disagree with my conclusions. I want this to be a thing for children, a university for children. We think we're more intelligent than children. We are not. What we are is more experienced. But with experience comes limitation. And that means that an adult is more experienced but less creative than a child. And that's why I deem our children our single most important natural resource. And I think Vincent Finelli would make an exceptional Dumbledore running each of us. And he has a video, I hope he puts it up on his site or mine, on showing you what an inner city, less funded metaphysical school for children might imply. And there it is, Vincent. That's what I wanted to do, make an announcement.
Okay, well, I just heard about this morning.
Yeah, I know. You've still got to think about it. I think you'd make an excellent one, at least teaching automotive. And when I say meta, by the way, meta includes water and survival. And so it's going to be teaching children how to test for water. And what we've got here in Grants Pass, Oregon, is a Pacifica Gardens. You can look it up. They have a thing called the Caterpillar. And the Caterpillar is primarily a monarch butterfly laboratory run by third graders going into first graders and teaching them how the monarch butterfly migrates. And I want to pull all of that crap out and put a mobile water testing laboratory in, run by third graders. Dr. Lenny Time is going to be one of the drivers, driving to grade schools and showing the children how to test for purity of water and how to clean water. And then the last chapter in that little workbook, which is workbook 3, is when the kid goes home and shows his parents how to do it.
Absolutely fascinating. And that's where we need to be. And by the way, my research has been leading me to learn that the Pope is so concerned about this coronavirus, this has not made the news, that he is looking to the children because the seniors among us are more susceptible to being taken out by these diseases. And the diseases, if you say how many were directly killed by the coronavirus, that's one thing. But if you say how many were killed because they were weakened by the air pollution, by the electromagnetic radiation, by the chemical poisoning, by the fluoride, by all of these things, and they've had other maladies, and they've succumbed to them, and the coronavirus was the catalyst in killing people, that's a completely different number from how many died of just the coronavirus. So we're looking at 200,000 dead now in China. We're looking at how serious this is. And in Hong Kong, right at this moment, we are learning that the school system, the government training camp for children, is being switched, moved, migrated to electronic learning, which is what you're talking about. So, it'll be disease-free to participate, as far as I can tell, with Albert Schweitzer University. Rick, I'm flattered. I've got some thinking to do.
You and I work really well together, and I like to have you be my boss. I don't need a boss. What I need is someone managing me. What I do best is write and speak, and that. But there's a whole bunch of other things: collecting tuition, determining who gets what degrees, da-da-da-da-da. That part, what I want to do is not be the boss. I don't want to be the boss on that. What I want to do is show up, do my thing, and then go write it. And National Geographic has accepted a manga comic workup I did. There's 10 comics called Aqua Girl and Her Quest for the Lost Secrets of Water. And comic 1, it shows her in bed being very ill. Her parents are concerned, and her 4 buddies that come in, like Toadstool and some others. And she's got to get to the top of that oak tree to get that usnea, old man's beard's moss, to make herself well. And how does she get up that tree? And that's what comic book 1 is, how capillary action works in terms of structured water going uphill against gravity.
Way, way outside the traditional line of thinking. Rick,
and I'm going to say better, that children are our single most important natural resource, and we are squandering it like we did Denver. And it's crazy. And when I have all my teeth out and I can't walk anymore, it's going to be one of these kids pushing me around in a wheelchair. And do I want to see this be a millennial or a Gen X? Right? Get a grip, man. I'd like to at least have someone half awake knowing what they're doing when I need that kind of care and taking. And right now, the coronavirus is a political movement. It's got legs. It's taking care of a whole bunch of different things. Have you noticed that our so-called national debt, Bitcoin crap, is already starting to show legs, where China is defaulting, and now we no longer have a debt? Isn't that interesting?
Well, yes, and this coronavirus is taking. Well, China gets the blame for it, but it's kind of like, well, did they really? They didn't really aim it at anyone. It's taking them out. It's taking out their manufacturing, and it's also taking out our manufacturing. And with the explosion on the West Coast, that's 2 refineries that have failed. The largest on the West Coast a couple of years ago. The largest on the East Coast.
That's right. You have an opportunity, and I'm going to suggest it's time that if you're going to put a garden in, the first thing you think about is your herbal pharmacy, because that's where all your medicines come from, whether you're diabetic, have a heart problem, or blood thinner. And
Rick,
everything comes from natural resources, and each habitat has chemical analogs from the Midwest. Golden seal on the East Coast and Midwest, it's Oregon grapefruit here on the West Coast. And when I talk about aspirin and other things, when you talk about aspen leaf and aspen bark, combining of those two, now what you have is acetylsalicylic acid with natural buffers. And that's the difference between German chemistry and American Yankee ingenuity. German chemistry went for targeted chemistries, what they call standardized extract, where they use alcohol to extract a specific chemistry out of, let's say, a pharmaceutical mushroom like cordycepin. However, by taking the mushroom itself, you also get beta-glucans and a series of other kinds of unrelated chemistries that somehow work together, and it's far cheaper to eat a natural product. And mushrooms, as mycelium, is essential in the leg of food chain, going from mycorrhiza and small microorganisms like thrip and nematode up into larger things like worms and the worm casings, and leading to better products in what you're eating. And once you start eating domestic, local produced foods, which is an opportunity, because Safeway is, everything's going to expand now because of China's not able to ship these foods into just-in-time delivery. And so your farmer's market and your own little growing thing is going to become more as an opportunity for self-survival. And I would recommend your herbal pharmacy is what you put in this week.
All right, hold that thought. So there are 3 types of mushrooms. Let's grow pharmaceutical mushrooms. Rick, so let's grow the most important mushroom right now, the psychedelic, gourmet, and pharmaceutical.
In my opinion, the most important, yes, they're all important. And the one I wrote first was psychedelic. Now you're going to find it's legal in Canada now to grow them. And it's not illegal to grow or have them on your person in the United States. It is illegal to extract or to sell them. Now, psychedelic mushrooms are toxins. However, microdosing in small quantities has been shown to be extremely beneficial, like CBDs in hemp. And why? What's going on? The mushroom itself is a look-alike chemistry toxin, and the body freaks out when it sees this mushroom with psilocin, psilocybin, novobiocysteine, and biocystin entering your body, and it produces a very similar but different neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter, brain chemistry, that neurotransmitter becomes a resonant cavity oscillator, as a metaphor, to dialogue with subtle bodies outside the physical body, what we call microtubules with structured water in it, which leaves the body at the moment of death. At the moment of death, there's a 5-gram weight loss. But what that body does is closer to psyche and to matter. And now your belief system in conscious states is only 10% for placebo. But when you produce a neurotransmitter, now your mind's eye becomes 60%. And that is how it all works. And so psychedelic mushrooms, CBDs, growing hemp, all of these are similar foods that are look-alike chemistries to neurotransmitters that are actually what do the job, your body.
Okay, so Rick, so we get a log, and it can't be a dead log. It's got to have some nutrition in it for the mushrooms to.
Well, it's conifer, it's rotting, and it has its chemistry, like birch, is mostly wintergreen oil. It's an oil in birch that the chaga prefers over shiitake, which likes oak. Predicated on where you live determines what you have laying down. What we have is turkey tail, having that, and reishi. We have reishi and turkey tail everywhere. We have chaga, but that's more in the colder Midwest up north, where it gets colder. And each one is slightly different and has a preferred conifer that it likes to grow on decaying wood or on a tree that's marginal and has a widowmaker on it or something of that nature, from bark beetle, whatever.
Okay, so
we're finding that this growing it is called forest farming.
Okay, so let's grow. Let's grow. Let's take a log. Let's take an oak log that we just cut. What do we do? You
drill a hole in it, and you go find the mushroom you want to have growing in it, and you use it as a plug, and you stick it inside it, and let it sit out in the temperature and watch what happens.
What temperature? Cool? Warm?
Well, the mushroom, like plants, have certain light bands and temperatures where they fruit. Because what you call mushroom is actually the fruiting cap. Mm-hmm. It's not the mycelium, which is this little white lines going through the whole of the trunk of the tree.
Okay, let's grow shiitake right now. I've got an oak Oak log. Just cut it. What do I do?
You drill holes in it, and you put shiitake plug into each of those holes, probably 20 or 30 holes. Put in 20 or 30, and just leave it on the ground.
Okay. In the shade, in the light, in where water drips on it?
Well, you want to have 50 to 60% on the shiitake. Each mushroom, again, is different. And so this week I'm going up on my site. I had Healing Yourself, which is your herbal pharmacy. This week I'm putting up stress management as a holistic approach. And next week I'll be writing on how to grow mushrooms in the forest. And in your home, up in an attic where you have complete darkness and a refrigerator.
Are you going to be selling this book?
Oh, yeah, it'll be e-books. Cheap, yes. Yes.
Okay.
And what I'm hoping is, if you're interested in the university, you register with boss man Vincent Finelli, signing up to be notified for when the classes start. I'm going to need at least 100 people taking this class, and we're going to write comic books out of it for your kids.
Looks like I'm going to have to put the website back up, class.
Yeah, looks like.
Please give me about a week to get all that accomplished.
Start inundating him. I want him to realize what Dumbledore's up against.
Rick, thank you for the honor.
My pleasure.
Let's grow some mushrooms. So you can go to eBay if you want and get some plugs. And you
I've got a better idea. We'll just make them available through the university, and we'll show you how to make your own plug and sell them if you'd like.
There you go. That's what we'll do. That's what we'll do. Class, thank you for your interest. And our plan is to get you self-reliant and independent. But consider getting out of Dodge. Tomorrow I'm going to give you some of my suggestions as to what you should get right now and why. Dr. Richard Allen Miller, thanks so much for being with us. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.